how have you been? So, yesterday I did upload my video of me opening up over 1,000 ancient chests, and I did think that it was probably going to happen, but a few of you did ask, how exactly did I get 1,000 of those ancient tickets basically free to play? The answer is simply dungeon. And that's what this background footage is. This is just a very small portion of what I was doing. But I did want to go through exactly what I changed my team to in order to basically get to endless run status in the dungeon. And you don't have to have a team like mine, specifically. But there are a few major components that you sort of usually have to bring together in order to have an endless dungeon run team. Healing, of course, is a pretty major one. The other pretty major thing that we needed at the time was also bless. Ideally 2 blesses at that, because while you're using different abilities on one of your blesses, your bless isn't going to actually last for 2 turns. So if you have a damage over time attack on you, then you get destroyed. But I have heard rumors that the dungeon has been changed now, so again, I don't know if these endless runs will be possible anymore from this point, but I still wanted to go through the mindset and the different abilities that I had on each of these dragons, so that, for people that were curious, and maybe this sort of thing will still be usable in the last week's dungeon, but I thought it might be useful to go through in case anyone was curious to see how people did it that weren't bug abusing. So it was really slow using a team like this, and honestly, a lot of the time, metal actually wasn't really usable, because if we did use metal, the problem is that Nezha has to bless the following turn, which does mean that we end up in a really sticky situation sometimes. But on my Erlang Shen, you'll notice that I did put the Epic Wonder on him instead of Nezha, and I'm actually starting to prefer having, if you do have a singular Epic, say Wonder, and you don't have Epic Acceptance or anything else, it's your only Epic, I actually prefer it being on the secondary Blessing Dragon. In this case, that is Mr. Erlang Shen, even though he's the one that uses it primarily. The reason why I prefer it on him is because obviously Nezha has the healing, the shielding, and the blessing. So having the Epic Wonder on the other dragon that doesn't have all the healing, I actually prefer. And on Erlang Shen, the Void ability, I never used it, ever. So that was pointless, whichever upgrade I had on that. But on his Metal ability, I did have On Guard, because we don't want our dragons to be taken out during these dungeon runs. So you want to pick the Metal upgrade that actually deals damage without one of your dragons having to die, which is why I took On Guard. And then for the Bless, I did take Mass Blessing, because we basically need it on all of our dragons. If you don't have Mass Blessing, one of them's gonna die. So those were the upgrades on Erlang Shen, and again, Rare Acceptance, Epic Wonder, did amazing. So on Ikez, I was swippy swapping quite a lot between, at least in the beginning, between his Ancient ability that I was going to use, because one of them is really, really good in the sense that the non-mass leech, the other one, in the fact that it does remove all of the plant attacks on you, like the damage over time attacks and things like that on your dragon. But the benefit of mass leech is that it actually buffs the other 2 dragons. And it doesn't just buff the other 2 dragons' attack, it does end up buffing the bless and the shield and the healing that we get. So if we use the ancient ability on Ikez, and then we attack an enemy, we get to usually one-shot an enemy, and that after we use that mass leech, we will buff any healing and any shielding that Nezha does, which is basically the way that we make this run go on endlessly. That is the key. And because the Mass Leech does last for the second turn, with Ikez it was basically you use Mass Leech, the ancient skill, on an enemy, and then the second turn you can either use it again, or you can use one of his AoE abilities. And on fire I've got Hot Coals and Burnout for his energy attack, because they are arguably the better choices. Although, Slow Burn's not bad, but it's not that good unless you've got Witchcraft usually. That's why I prefer having Hot Coals. And Hot Coals is actually quite good for dungeon quests, which is another benefit. And so finally moving on to Nezha's upgrades that we had. Also rare Wonder Acceptance. All of these dragons had Wonder Acceptance. The question was just on which one had the Epic Wonder, which was Erlang. But on Nezha, we do have staying alive Earth ability. So the Tombstone instead of the other one, Stone Cold. Because we just want that shield to stay on for an additional turn. Much more important than, you know, relying on us dying. Because, again, any abilities that rely on one of our dragons dying to gain the benefit, we don't want that. So that's why the Tombstone is better for the Earth skill in the dungeon. Healing, always take the Restore, because it removes any of the negative effects on your allies, which is, especially in last week's dungeon, incredibly important. You can't really not use it, to be honest with you. And I do also have Mass Bless on Nezha, although if you do have two Divines, it is possible to have one of them have Mass Bless, and the other one have Great Bless. And essentially, if we were to use Mass Bless with Erlang Shen, and then if we needed to use a Bless on Nezha, we could always use the Great Bless just on Erlang, and then Erlang would have to use Bless again the following turn. So it's a lot of Bless, but you can do it either way. It's just Mass Blessing is more reliable, more brain dead, shall we say. They're both quite reliable, but it's more brain dead. And, you know, when you're doing these dungeon runs, again, if we can still end up doing them these days, the biggest problem for me is that if you make one mistake with your Bless with Nezha, or if you make one mistake with your shield, sometimes that's the end of your run. In fact, most of the time, it will be the end of your run if you metal and then you fail to Bless. That will be the end of the dungeon run. So, if you're going to sit here for 6 or 7 hours straight grinding in this dungeon, very slowly getting extra stepping stones, either through quests or just by singular KOs, it is going to take a long time. And if you're not paying attention, you will make mistakes. So that's why the biggest challenge for me was actually just getting over myself not paying attention. You know, it's just one of those things where if you're going to be sitting there doing the same thing for so long, you're probably going to make a mistake here or there, but you can't really afford to do it. So I sort of got myself into a routine. Now, as soon as I saw myself using metal on Erlang Shen, I was like, Nezha needs to Bless, Nezha needs to Bless, Nezha needs to Bless, until I actually used the Bless, because otherwise I would completely forget and I'd use Tombstone again. It's just so habit to just go straight to the Tombstone rather than actually blessing, because I just used a Bless not long ago, and I'm going to have to use a Bless straight after I use a Bless. But, you know, it's how you keep Erlang Shen alive in case he gets hit by Plant or Shadow. So, that is generally how I did it, and again, it was one of those things where I could only really afford to use metal on this team when Erlang Shen and everyone else was basically at full HP, because I would have to use the metal skill, and that would hit everyone, and then Nezha would have to Bless, and then Nezha would have to shield, and then Nezha would get to heal. So that's 3 turns I have to go without healing, so you have to pre-plan it basically 3 turns in advance. And I would never use shield with use metal with Erlang Shen unless I used shield with Nezha the turn before. Those were basically the big prerequisites, and I also had to make sure that I was using the leech before I used the shield on Nezha. So essentially, if I was gonna try and plan for a metal turn, it would start with Erlang Shen uses Bless, and then Ikez uses his Ancient skill or anyone. Then Nezha uses Shield, then Erlang Shen uses Metal, and then Ikez can usually ideally use Ancient again, and then Nezha would have to, after Erlang Shen uses Metal, Nezha has to buff. So then Nezha uses Bless, then we come back to Erlang Shen blesses again, then Ikez either uses AoE or Ancient again, and then Nezha gets to shield and then heal. So it's basically 3 turns in advance, but realistically it takes like 6 turns total. So if I ever go against enemies that do manage to subdue, or their shadow attacks actually hit me and frighten any of my dragons, it can take 15 turns to recover. But we do have the healing and the shielding to come back from it. So, you know, it is quite different from how DML is when you're just doing map battles or when you're just doing arena battles, because the difference between those battles and doing the dungeon stuff and actually having to think that far ahead in battles is something that you don't really have to do in the rest of DML. And I did kind of enjoy it, but at the same time doing it for 7 hours straight, that can get a bit ugh. I do wish I could have grinded it more, but my power kept going out in the last few days. Typical, otherwise I probably would have had an Eoscar by now. Game just wanted to basically say screw you to me at the last minute, and by the game I mean the power company. Pain be to them, but I've already complained. I'm already getting free money back, so all's well that ends well. We just need to hope that the final dungeon isn't so insanely buffed that we can still do these sorts of endless dungeon runs. Again, I haven't seen confirmation yet on if it's still possible or not, but that is how I formulated this team, put this team together so that I could get into endless run status. And again, we still had to be really careful of shadow dragons and subdue dragons, and there's one energy dragon that it used burnout on me once and it instantly ended this run. Well, not this particular run, but a different one. And it had never ever used burnout before then, and it just used it this one time out of nowhere, and immediately every single energy dragon scared the daylights out of me. So that is a weakness of the team. There's no getting around that. You can also use dungeon teams that use a lot of healing light, although they're very gimmicky as well. And you know, having the Ancient also have Metal is really the best of both worlds, but obviously I don't have a Metal Ancient. I didn't play the Metal Ancient event, so we were kind of stuck. But, you know, for those of you that were curious, that's how I did it, and that's how I got up to 20-something thousand dungeon stepping stones and then just spent them all in one run. And you just do that again and again and again, just get basically endless resources. That's what a lot of people did. That's what I would have done had I been given the time and the electricity to do it. I mean, if you are willing to sit there and grind it, I don't see any issue with it. It's just like hatching fire dragons. The problem is that some people out there weren't doing it legitimately, and they were using a specific bug to abuse the dungeon even more. I'm not going to tell you what that is, by the way. Some other people even decided to set up Autobots, in a sense, to do some other things with the runs, which I'm also not going to specify. So some of the KO counts, they're not legitimate. I'm just going to say that right now. They're not. Some of the ones that you might have seen on some of the Android leaderboards in particular. But some of those 20,000 runs, 30,000 runs were legitimate. The ones that weren't were the 100,000 KO leaderboards. They're not possible. Even if you legitimately had the best dungeon comp and you were playing every waking minute of the day, I fail to see how any human being... it's not actually possible. to reach 100,000 plus. So just keep that in mind when you are seeing people, if they ever post their scores and things like that. I'm not someone that's going to advocate for bug abusing, and I'm not someone that's going to advocate for people cheating, which is one of the reasons why this dungeon got nerfed so much. But, you know, it's all here for information for anyone that wants to know and anyone that was curious. And maybe one day you can use it yourself if you get yourself 2 divines and you don't even need metal, but just an ancient. 2 divines and an ancient and you are probably set, but they at least need to have healing and ideally a shield as well. But anyway, I want to leave it there for now. You got to see this endless grind going on in the background. It is mind-numbing, but in a sort of peaceful way. Quite like it, but I do wish you the best of luck. I do hope that you get every dragon that you want out of the ancient event, and keep grinding. Keep grinding.